Hello everyone, I'm High Treason, and in the past few years we've spoke a lot about different computer hardware, and today, well, we're going to talk about some computer software, because let's face it, the hardware would be pretty much useless without it. I mean, it would do some stuff, but really not a lot more than generate a small amount of heat, and I've got a good electric heater for that. Or a Core 2, that'll generate a lot of heat, not a lot else. But yeah, so what we're going to have a look at today is Windows for Workgroups version 3.11. It was a very popular version of Microsoft Windows in the early to mid 90s. In fact, it was pretty much everywhere, unless you were running Windows NT, which was visually similar and really wasn't that much different, I suppose, until version 4. So let's get into it. So, at first glance, Windows 3.11 is a bit boring looking, and this is probably aided by millions and millions of videos and screenshots where it's running with no video drivers, no software, and the operator clearly has no real knowledge of how the system even works. In short, the cool kids who run it in DOSBox and want supporting on Patreon because they're too shit to get their own stuff and want to buy that voodoo card someone told them was cool, which they probably know nothing about if they'll ever even use it. Well, under the hood, it's an interesting piece of history, and I think most of us have used it at some point. Long-time subscribers probably know that Windows 3.10 came with my first computer. The family already had a computer, but my first computer, the first one that was actually mine, had Windows 3.1 on it. The interface is pretty much identical to this version, and that interface is rather different from what you're used to today. There's no stupid security questions, in fact there's almost no security at all, and near enough nothing in the way of background services clogging it up, and no fancy graphics wasting cycles. It's cold, archaic, and if you don't know what you're doing with it, you can land yourself in serious trouble quite easily. The OS came on several floppy disks, and I can't say how many because this is the third copy I've owned. I still have one of the other ones. This one has 8 disks, but the other copy has 11, and both are on the same disk size. The larger copy doesn't ask for the last few disks, so all I can think is it must be an OEM version with extra drivers. There's also a huge manual included with awesome system requirements. The original 3.1 supported a 286, but both benefit, and in fact this version requires a 386SX as a minimum. It doesn't say which clock speed, so I assume you can throw it on a little 12 MHz embedded one if you want to. I did run the old version, 0.10, on a 12 MHz 286 laptop once, and it was usable, although doing this will forfeit 386 enhanced mode, which will limit the usefulness of the operating system. You also do need a whopping 3 MB of RAM, though it does recommend 4 with networking installed, but you can get away with 2 if you don't have that. Less than 10 MB of drive space, though you'll need closer to 15 megs for a full install, and what it doesn't tell us is that it also wants MS-DOS installed already. Well, it kinda does, but yeah, that might not strike you right off the get-go. My personal recommendation is to use a 386DX as a minimum, because that can run 32-bit code, and it allows you to install 8 megs or more of memory a bit easier, because motherboards for those generally had more accessible upgrade options, and that'll be quite handy if you start using the operating system a lot. Installation is actually not hard. You have to install DOS first, and if you can do that, you can do this. Most people run it on top of DOS 6.22, and I'm included in that group. But if you're using a faster 486 such as a DX4 or even a Pentium, DOS 7.1's worth consideration, as it's free as far as I know, and it lets you do a few more things, most notably supporting FAT32 partitions, allowing you to use larger hard drives such as the 4GB IBM I'm using in my computer at the moment. A little more elegantly than you otherwise would. Less partitions means less memory usage, and this is actually fact. Accessing extended partitions actually uses more memory and cripples performance a little, especially with a large number of logical drives. The installer is really neat and tidy. I'm actually running this in a virtual machine, but I'll switch to the real hardware once I've got to the point of it being installed. It asks you a few questions about your computer, just like the ones DOS does. They're literally the same, as far as I can see. Anything you don't recognise is usually OK left on default. In fact, I usually change nothing more than regional settings and keyboard layouts until later. Later refers to the Windows portion of setup. Yeah, your computer's actually going to run Windows already when it gets to this stage. Windows 95 used a mini Windows for its setup program, is what they called it, which was essentially a stripped down Windows 3.1, so does that make this mini Windows? It could be nano Windows. Hey, I know, let's call it micro Windows. Once the system reaches this point, it tries to find a mouse, and you can use it if it does. Otherwise, it's keyboard only. It provides accelerators to make this task a little easier and quicker. Those are the underlined letters on buttons and options. This generally means that pressing that key with that block of the window in focus will select that option, or toggle it, depending on what it is. It grates on me that a lot of software now doesn't do this. If you don't like those, you can tab and shift tab to move around, which is standard Windows stuff, and it still worked in Windows 8.1 when I tried it. You'll be asked a few more things, but you don't have to input a serial number. Yeah, that's it. It's never going to ask you again. Did you pirate it? Well, enjoy. The system really couldn't care less. You also get to select which features you want, which I liked and couldn't understand why they're removed from later versions. Perhaps I don't fucking like solitaire. And did it ever cross your mind I don't use your crappy media player? Did you not stop to think that somebody might not want wallpapers in bitmap format using up the hard drive? Well, it's not a problem here. You can strip the thing bare if you want to. And if you change your mind later, you can do it in the operating system, in the exact same dialog box. You can go really in depth and add or remove individual items to your heart's content. Network setup is optional, it's not a mandatory thing, and you can skip it, and I actually would recommend this if you don't have a mouse hooked in yet, because sometimes the installer can get stuck out of focus when you exit the driver's window. You can usually get the focus back on the window by pressing Alt F4, which threatens the installer with closing and brings up a message, which forces the selection back into focus. But I've had this not work, and if that happens you have to restart the installation from the beginning again. Even if you do set the network up, you'll have to tamper with it again later anyway to make it work with your network, unless you're using some really ancient IPX protocol to connect everything up, which is generally more trouble than it's worth. Eventually the installer will ask you for disk after disk after disk. Depending on what you decided to install, it might never ask for some of them, and that's normal. Your system simply doesn't need the files on those disks at the moment, but you might need them if you decide to install some other options later. Some installation related things are covered in the next section, but that's the gist of the installation process. On the usability side of things, it's actually really easy to use, in my opinion. Let's put it this way, I don't really think the average person would have too much difficulty getting around, especially if you had experience with a computer beforehand. I mean, even my granddad got the hang of the interface very quickly, because it was on his first computer, and I mean, granted, he's smarter than the average granddad, and he was a computer technician for a while, but that's not the point. They were a lot different when he was working on them. You didn't have graphical user interfaces, and he got the hang of it pretty fast. You know, it's not from his generation, so it's really quite easy and it's quite self-explanatory. We'll look into it in more depth. It may present a learning curve to people who used newer systems though. Until Windows 8, the interface was built upon the Windows 95 principles, primarily a desktop and a start menu, and these are still similar in Windows 10 and not really foreign to anybody that used Windows 95, and I expect the reverse is somewhat true. You don't have those here though, at least not by default. Instead you're provided with the task top, and I don't believe that to be the official name. I'd have to consult the manual. But it's more fitting than desktop for people that know the Windows 95 type interfaces. Essentially, this space exists to display whatever pattern or wallpaper you've set up, just like the one I have, because by default it's just grey, which I actually quite like because grey is an efficient colour and it's not pretentious, as well as any programs that are minimised, displaying as an icon along the bottom. The Program Manager is always there, as it's the shell for this system. It's what you had before Explorer. Any open programs appear as icons on this space in whatever order they want to, and it can become a bit messy if you multitask heavily in the operating system. As you can see, it does behave a lot like the taskbar rather than the desktop, as you can't just place your own icons on here. So it's sort of halfway between the two. The Program Manager shell is much like the grey background of the task top, as I'm calling it, only it's predominantly white instead. Everything here is managed as a group or an item. These don't exist as directories and files on the hard drive. Instead, each program group is a file on the hard drive, and each item is simply data stored within those files. That points to a real file on the hard drive. So essentially it's like a shortcut, but it can point to more than one thing. It's a little bit weird. It might be a little bit confusing when you realise that some of them are linked to PIF files, and PIF is a rather unintuitive extension because according to Microsoft it means MS-DOS shortcuts. From a technical standpoint, the program menu is structurally similar to the start menu, even to the extent that you can't make new program items in the first window. You can, however, make new program groups or add items to any existing group. Opening a group file in later Windows versions would convert it and place it as a directory in the Programs folder of the Start menu. It's fairly obvious what to do with it though. You click on what you want, or use the menu, as that works too for some things. You'll soon notice, especially if you have a rickety old serial mouse like mine, that the icons don't automatically align to any grid. Instead, you have to select an option in the menu which puts them in whatever order the system thinks is best at that particular time. You will also realise that right-clicking doesn't really do anything. A single left-click will bring up a context menu if there is one to be brought up. Double-clicking does what you'd expect to, though. The main group contains things you will probably use, like File Manager. It's what else but a file manager. This is a bit like the Explorer part of Windows Explorer. In fact, if you ever had the left pane turned on, it might look quite familiar, and it's about halfway between DOS Shell and Explorer. Unlike DOS Shell though, it's actually really fast, even when you have a lot of files to list. From here you can look at files on different drives, copy them, delete them, do whatever basically. You can also format disks if you want to, or share a folder if you installed networking and enabled that. Rather strangely, this is under the disk menu, even though you can use it with directories. Be careful though, because there are no checks for whether a file is needed by the system, and if you start moving and deleting things out of system folders, then you're going to restart to find a rather disheartening boot failure. You can also map network drives from the menus in this program. The control panel is a separate applet again, and it was until at least Windows 7, where it might still be, but it sure as hell seems to open in Windows Explorer now. It's a complete mess today. The layout in this is simple and clean, and it's mostly self-explanatory, aside from the networking and video adapters, which are noticeably absent. So the control panel does what it's supposed to do, and it does it well. It doesn't have unnecessary bells and whistles and stupid bloody inconsistencies. It's very well designed in my opinion. Networking and video adapters, and also your mouse, are in the main program group under Windows Setup. It's a little bit odd, but then the software is from the company that later taught the world to turn off their computers by pressing a button marked Start. So really, I'm not surprised. This little window allows you to mess around with your display adapter. This is also how you change resolutions with the majority of adapters. Yeah, that's right, each resolution is essentially a separate driver. Some companies such as ATI did include their own software, which made it a little easier for noobs to change settings like that. The network option opens yet another window, and there are a few other windows leading away from that, which sounds confusing, but it's actually not that difficult, and again, it should be reasonably self-explanatory. And of course you can mess about with the installed Windows components from here, as I said before. So if you've changed your mind about something you did or didn't install, well, you can do it now. As a last note, there is some irony in that despite the operating system being a little bit ugly, you can customise its appearance a lot more than is possible in later operating systems, at least proportional to how much there is available. Almost everything can be made to appear a different colour. Microsoft also included a special colour scheme for monochrome laptop displays and a few other things, so they put a lot of thought into this. Printers though, ooh, I always had problems getting these to work for some reason. I mean, it seems simple enough, so it could just be that it didn't like my dot matrix printers. I don't know, and I can't really say. I got this computer to work with my HP LaserJet 4 rather easily though. It didn't protest to it at all. Smells like ozone depletion. Certainly seems to work. Yeah, I still don't own a colour printer. I have a star dot matrix that's technically capable of it, but I've never installed a colour ribbon, and it needs some work before it's going to print anything again, because it keeps throwing error codes out now. Now, of course, releasing an operating system without the ability to upgrade it in some way is a very silly idea, especially in the early 1990s, because technology was moving pretty quickly at the time. It was not long before you got processors that would run at double the clock rate, and the same would happen again, and then you'd double the cycles per clock and whatever. It was pretty insane, really, compared to today. The operating system can be upgraded a few ways, and that makes sense, especially given that it was released at a time when hardware was advancing very quickly, so not giving users an upgrade path would have probably been suicidal. I mean, you could keep releasing new versions and making people pay for it, but I don't think the user base would have stood for it personally. Truth is, the word upgrade is a very broad term. At its most basic level, you can update or add new drivers, such as if you've added a sound card, by going to the relevant applet and pointing it to the directory that the drivers are in. It's fairly straightforward, even though you will have to tell it which IRQs and IO ports have been used most of the time. It's almost certainly going to be easier than doing it in MS-DOS. Of course, you will still need to set it up in MS-DOS if you want to use the device in there as well, and that could cause memory constraints, so you'll have to look into setting up the config sys and everything, but that's for a DOS video. That's nothing to do with this. One upgrade you'll probably want to do is install the 32-bit stack, Win32C. Win32C allows some 32-bit code to be run under the operating system, and it comes with FreeCell, which is a card game. It's useful for testing the install, but I don't really see much point in playing cards on a computer. You will need Win32C to install the TCP stack, which is going to allow you to connect to a more modern network. One thing you'll notice when connecting using the TCP stack is that Windows might take longer to start up. It'll sit and wait on its boot screen with no drive activity, no real anything. You can sometimes circumvent this by using static IP addresses instead of relying on a DHCP. Shared network resources are still accessible by computers running Windows 8.1 as far as I've seen, but accessing resources on a newer system using this old one can be more complicated, requiring a newer computer be configured to forfeit some of its security. You can always run a virtual machine on the newer computer with additions installed, which would let you treat it as another window, such as dragging files straight in and out of it. So you can get around it that way by using the virtual machine as a kind of middleman. Furthermore, you can still use the internet with the TCP stack, at least for now. I'm really not sure what the implications will be once IPv6 comes out. But for now, at least, the stack allows you to connect to internet services. Unfortunately, using the web is technically possible, though rather impractical. You could still connect to an FTP, Telnet or Gopher, or even an email server without any problems if you wanted to, though. Because I find it a lot harder, because at my house, the internet is made of wood. On the internet are a few more tools. One of them is Calmira. I believe that's how you pronounce it. A third-party add-on which adds a Windows 95 style interface, or maybe more like the shell update from Windows NT 351. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that when you could just install Windows 95, but hey, it's out there if you want to try it, and it's a pretty cool idea. Another tool I use a lot is IIS WinPlay 3, which is an MP3 player. If you don't have an FPU installed, it won't work, and you're really going to need at least a decent 486 to be able to make any real use of it. You've probably seen me using it in quite a few videos to demonstrate sound cards or the power of a CPU. There exist other media players, both third-party and from Microsoft themselves, which can play other files. Even a few video formats are supported by some of them, but it's hardly the best platform to watch movies on. I mean, you're not going to be using it on a home theatre PC. Of course, WinRAR, WinZip, standard software like that is available, and you will probably want to install it. Of course, there's a whole host of software from the era that will work with the operating system, such as Microsoft Office. You might find you want to use an older version of that for some reason. I mean, perhaps you like the interface, or maybe you're just doing it for laughs. Several patches and extras exist from Microsoft, such as Video for Windows, Internet Explorer up to version 5, Wing, and likely more. Oh, also Ski Free. I hate this game so much that I kind of like it. You would probably have been able to keep this operating system in the realms of usable well into the late 1990s by my estimations. You can actually do quite a bit with it when you think how basic the base system was. As for other software you can run, well, we did cover most other software in the upgrade section we just did, but there are a lot of other programs and applications out there you can run on it. It's a very popular operating system in its time, and so a lot of people supported it, and Microsoft really went to town on it. They released a lot of stuff for this operating system. They released games, they released Office suites, and so on and so on. So there's really no shortage here. Microsoft released a Windows Entertainment Pack. It's quite well known, and it was comprised of 4 volumes. Basically, a bunch of floppy disks with Windows games on them. These were installed to the hard drive and mostly required a mouse to be played. They were pretty good, really. I mean, most of the games are simple, but they can hold your attention for quite a while. There's also a screensaver pack included, which might be useful to you. As for the games, I recommend Pipe Dream, because that one's really quite addicting. Chips Challenge, because pretty much the same thing. Rodent Revenge, because I hate cats. And Jazz Ball. Oh, and it does come with Ski Free, so yeah, fucking Ski Free. Yeah, let's try going up the mountain instead of down. Maybe we'll get away from the adorable snow creature or whatever it is. Yeah, obviously that doesn't work. The OS isn't completely bare when you install it though, unless you choose not to install anything with it. It does come with simple software that is rather useful. I mean, Notepad does what you'd expect. It opens plain text files, and it's not vastly different from the versions still included with Windows today. I really like Notepad, actually. It's one of my favourite programs. It's a brilliant program. It has a million uses, and whether that's jotting down notes or keeping a list of your favourite porn sites, or even editing a batch file, or even something like, I don't know, maybe you want to do some 90s style HTML web design. Yeah, that's not. WordPad's also included, or it kind of is. It's called Write. It can edit some slightly more advanced files, but if you install Microsoft Word, the chances are you'll never need it anymore. Still, it is there, and it's useful if you want some simple formatted text, without the hassle of a heavy Office suite. Paint is, well, it's basic compared to the likes of Photoshop, but it's not really meant to be flashy. It's usable, and it actually does a few things better than later versions. Mostly with the eraser and available shapes. I don't know, I just like the interface in this. It's very difficult to play with colours with a 16 colour display though, so I hope you installed the video driver, because if you didn't, it's your fault, and don't blame Paint. It may have problems reading true colour bitmaps from some newer programs, but it's very rare and I can't reproduce it for this video, as I've long since forgotten what triggers it. Media Player is good. It's what it says and not some invasive application that takes up an entire screen. Now this is what software in a multitasking operating system should look like. Compact, easy to use and easy to learn. And the fact it's easy to use is a good thing, because playlists weren't really a thing yet. And it won't play CD audio. It does play MIDI, WAV and a few other formats. Usually I've used it with WAV files to test sound cards, as pulling a WAV file uses quite a lot of bandwidth, so it tests a network card, a reasonable amount of RAM so we see how reliable that is, and we get to see whether the sound card works. Don't let that put you off though, it is actually a very efficient program. Sound Recorder is a sound recorder, who would have guessed? I don't really have any use for it personally, but if you wanted to test the input of your sound card, I suppose it could be useful for that without requiring third-party applications. And if you had a mic back in the day, it was a novelty enough to record your own voice for the 5 seconds your shitty computer could handle and just listen to the grainy audio being played back. Plus, it was somewhat of a novelty to change the startup sound to some guy swearing his face off and replace all the error sounds with more rude words. I miss being a kid sometimes. Hang on, wait a minute, now I don't. When I was a kid all I wanted to do was be an adult, and I don't regret that. There are a few other things included, but I'll leave you to discover those for yourself if you want to mess with the operating system, or already have. Because maybe you have a favourite piece of software that I haven't mentioned, and maybe you think the clock is an unsung hero, or the card file's the best thing since sliced bread. And by all means jot it down in the comments. MS-DOS programs can actually be run under Windows, but it's a bit hit and miss. Simple programs like Edit will work fine, and you can even multitask with them, having more Windows or DOS programs open at the same time. You can full screen them too. I shouldn't have to mention that, but it seems newer operating systems don't support this, which is ironic now most applications are full screen. Anyhow, it has limited uses. If you try to play games, they'll often cause the system to complain about the sound card and whatnot. It's not really a problem because exiting back into DOS is a fairly quick and easy process. It's not as good as Windows 95 in the DOS on Windows department then, but it's better than Windows 2.1 by quite a margin, so it was a natural stage of development in this capability. As we've already seen, third-party software works well too, but you should always read the instructions, because software wasn't always clever enough to realise you didn't have a driver, library or service installed that it depended on, and you could be running around for hours trying to figure out why it won't work otherwise, which is never much fun. On the hardware side of things, there's not really much worth mentioning. It's basically the same as DOS. I mean, the OS needs DOS to run, we already know that, so if it makes a good DOS computer, the general rule is it will make a good Windows for Workgroups computer. 90% of the time, there are a few exceptions. In short, a good 4860x266 DOS rig, like the one I've captured most of this video with, will generally make a good Windows 3.11 machine. If your computer is a little anemic though, like a 286, you might have to look into upgrading the RAM or display adapter to be able to use Windows at all. I find that 486 systems are the best platform for this operating system. They seem to yield the best performance, are period appropriate as they first showed up in 1989, the same year the concept version of Windows 3 was created, and began disappearing around 95 when the Pentium had actually started to work properly at a price that was becoming reasonable, which ties in with Windows 95 being launched a little later. 386 processors will also work well, and actually seem to be what Microsoft built the system for. It'll run fast enough and be more than usable. As for the 286, I really don't recommend it. I mean, you can make it work on one, but it's probably not worth it, unless you only want to use it as a file manager. I mean, it will work with limited capabilities. There's really not much you can do with it outside of that. Video cards weren't such a big deal yet. Anything else period appropriate should work, to be honest. Accelerators won't yield much if any improvement though. Some cards can make Windows run a bit smoother, but 3D accelerators, which had existed for a while now from companies like Matrox, were really for specialist applications, and they aren't worth the time or the money for a general user. It's really not worth it. You'll never use it. Sound cards, again, generally just any sound card that was good in DOS, as Windows doesn't really make heavy use of them, unless you install software that does. I like the Pro Audio Spectrum cards because they come with a nice abundance of software included in the drivers, but Sound Blasters will yield good results as they are very easy to install. Of course they are, they're the slag of all sound cards, and they'll go with absolutely anything. Hard drives are something the system really doesn't give a damn about. If DOS supports it, Windows supports it generally. This is why you can use DOS 7.1 on a FAT32 drive like I have here. And that's something that's worth thinking about if you've got a faster machine. Sure, the OS wasn't designed for that and you can't see the long file names, but does it really matter? Well, no, because it works anyway. CD-ROM drives are similar in that they don't generally require any support by Windows. Loading a DOS CD-ROM driver makes it appear in Windows. That's how you do it in this system. Network cards are actually pretty easy to install, and they're not that hard. 3Com cards are good. Any 2000 clones are simple. They're running absolutely anything. This computer I've used today has a clone of one in. Very easy to get it working. Realtek 8139 is fully functional. Realtek 8029 will also work in this operating system to my knowledge without the bugs it had in Windows 95. In reality you'll want a network card and to install networking stuff first, because it'll make getting the other drives installed easier, because then you can just pull them from a shared folder. There isn't much else to say on hardware. I'm sure there's some gimmicky device that some twat will drag out of his ass before asking you to send him money for more pointless crap that he's not going to use. He's just going to show you 30 seconds of it to boost his fucking ad revenue or whatever. I don't throw my money at pointless crap because prostitutes are more useful. Roundup. Well, this is like the summary in my game reviews, and it does include a score, but it's to be taken rather a lot more lightly. As with my game reviews, the score is relevant to the time period of the software and not the world today. So, installation, I'm scoring it 18 out of 20. It's not hard to install. If you can install DOS, you can install Windows. The GUI that shows up was a very nice way to complete the installation from within a Windows shell itself, and most important options can be changed as well as components deselected if you don't want them on your computer. There's not a lot of room for improvement at the time it was released without making it bloated and inefficient. Also, whilst we didn't go over it, there is a whole tutorial you can run at the end of the installation process, and it's actually a pretty good one. I mean, it's not perfect, but it would teach you the basics of using the operating system, I believe. So if you do have some difficulties with it, or you think you might, then maybe give it a run. You can quit it at any time if you feel it's talking down to you or something. Usability is 18 out of 20. Again, whilst not perfect, it's hard to see how they could have improved that. Sure, the Amiga Workbench might have been a little bit more pleasant to look at, and Mac OS might have been more centralised, but the PC platform was still only just taking off after years of being primarily limited to text mode office crap, and this was a solid improvement over what we had before. Everything seems to do what it's supposed to do, but some options can come off as a little confusing, notably sticking the network setup outside of the control panel. And keep in mind, I'm not going to dock points for it being full of officey things in its software library, because computers are meant to do officey things. I'm just pointing out that people saw the PC as been a bit uncool because it didn't really do anything else before this. Or when it did, it was something of a special occasion. Upgrades, 19 out of 20. It's very upgradable, and it was certainly usable until Windows 95 came along, and you'd still be able to hang on to it for quite some time after that if you'd really wanted to. Windows 95 was the big push for 32-bit, and Windows 3.1.1 has limited abilities here. Despite this, you could easily bring it into the realms of multimedia PC, which the world was going nuts on at the time. And couple that with a bunch of third-party software that can be installed, and it's rock solid here, provided you don't get carried away. So on the third-party software side of things, 19 out of 20. A lot of software that you still use today was born under this operating system originally, and it isn't any more compatible with it, but it was back then, and it has its roots here. Windows 3.1.1 was the first GUI for the PC platform which was considered worthwhile competition to the Amiga and the Mac, and as a result a large number of companies and people that did or still do support it made software. It's generally quite easy to make software work with it when it's supposed to, provided you know what you're doing with computers from this time period, and interfaces are usually very self-explanatory, mostly because they're about as simple as it can possibly be. Hardware, 19 out of 20. As there really isn't any specific hardware, I guess it reflects how well it worked with the existing hardware and how compatible it seems to be. As the score implies, it seems to work well. Generally good DOS hardware is good Windows 3.1.1 hardware, and a decent amount of the most common hardware was supported by the system from day one. I'd actually say it was better than modern systems in some respects. It only loses a point because of some vendors using weird installers. I always thought Microsoft maybe should have locked down on that a bit. I mean, these days everyone uses their own crappy installer, so they never did, and I'm sure if they had there would have been outrage. I'd have been in the minority for supporting that. So the final score is 93 out of 100. Which, to be honest, is a pretty good score. And you've got to keep in mind it's relevant to the time the software was, well, relevant and not the world today. The world today obviously would score a lot lower because for general use now it would be pretty useless, I think. Well, it depends what you would do. If you just wanted to write Word documents, it might be fine. You could probably get away with a much cheaper computer if that's what you were going to do. And yeah, I have to say, I still really like this operating system. It's pretty much the first Windows version I ever really used properly, and I've always liked the interface. Like I say, it makes sense in some way, and the simple look appeals to me. I honestly don't like wasting cycles on pointless visuals. It doesn't make any sense to me. Make it presentable, but don't make it pretty. It just needs to be functional. I prefer practicality above all, and I like it to perform well, and that's what this does. It's quick, and it looks as nice as it needs to, but clearly usability was a priority here, and that's good in my opinion. And that's probably about all I have to say on it. Like I say, it's a good little operating system. I still like it. It is good, and yeah, I'm going to start uploading Flashback, so if you don't want to watch that, don't bother. I don't care. I'm going to upload them anyway. It's 14 parts. I'll probably upload them once a week until it's done. It's not affecting anything else. Obviously everything is absolutely broken. I don't even know what I'm going to render this on, because I've had to rely on the Pentium 3, and that's got broken now, because the Core 2 Quad's gone, the Core 2 Duo's gone, the Phenom's gone. The Athlon 1500's broke, my laptop's not up to it, so we're basically completely broke in both senses of the word. I have nothing that works, and I can't afford to buy more stuff that does. I think I'm going to have to sell some things, and yeah, it's not really good, but it could be worse. I have more pressing issues at the moment, so I'll try and get something done, but I can't make money materialise out of thin air, unfortunately, because it is pissing me off. But I'm High Treason. Thanks for watching, and yeah, I haven't really done software in depth like this before, so let me know what you think of it. It might take me a while to refine this, and with any luck I will be back sometime this year. It's about all I can say. I can't say anything else because I can't predict how long it's going to take to get this put together, never mind anything beyond this. But there are things I want to do. I have like a backlog of scripts and ideas, and I can't do anything with them, and it's frustrating because I like to do stuff like this. I'm naturally creative, I like being constructive, and I go nuts when I can't be. It gets to me. So yeah, I'm High Treason. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the future, hopefully not too far away. Really, I don't know, it's all knackered. I'll try my best. I'd like to take a quick moment to say special thanks to James Wallace, who has donated me this whole box of stuff, most of which seems to work. I'm not done testing it yet. It should be immensely useful for a few things. We've got loads of RAM in there, a couple of motherboards, loads of expansion cards, a lot of graphics cards, mostly GeForces, and an S3 Trio 3D, which you can't go wrong with. Terrible 3D card, but very good in 2D. And I did have one of those years ago, but it stopped working. I kept meaning to get another one. I got another one now, and it seems to work, so can't go wrong with that.